Hey there, amazing nerds! Welcome back to another fantastic video on our channel. Today, we'll be looking at some of the major works and major figures of Middle English prose. English prose writing has a clearer family tree than verse. It all started back in the early Middle English days and has been going strong ever since. Now, let me tell you, prose may not have those flashy, mind-blowing moments like Chaucer, Langland, and the author of Sir Gawayne, but it kept on growing, finding its groove in religious and everyday stuff. Religious writing got pretty mystical and contemplative during this time. There were two standout writers, Walter Hilton, who wrote The Scale of Perfection, and an unknown author who wrote The Cloud of Unknowing. Yeah, that tracks. Anywho, these writers wanted to tone down the excessive style of Richard Roll's works. You know, the Richard Roll of Hampole from our previous video. Guess what? This mystical tradition continued into 15th century with two awesome ladies, Julian of Norwich and Margery Kempe. Julian wrote about her mystical experiences in 16 Revelations of Divine Love, while Margery Kempe's The Book of Margery Kempe tells the extraordinary story of a bourgeoisie woman. Both books are super interesting, written in engaging styles, and give you a clear picture of what life was like in medieval times. People were also into translating Latin texts from the continent, especially when it came to contemplative prose. This guy, Nicholas Love, was a big deal for his translation of The Mirror of the Blessed Life of Jesus Christ. It was a big hit because it presented a more traditional view to counter the radical ideas of the Lollards. The Lollards were followers of John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe and his buddy John Purvey were credited with some writings, like the Lollard Bible. The Lollard Bible, which ended up influencing later translations like the one by William Tyndale and even the famous King James Version. In the late 14th century, people started getting more interested in secular prose, although it wasn't always as fancy as the religious stuff. Chaucer tried his hand at it with stories like The Tale of Melibus and some translations about the stars. But let's be honest, it was not mind-blowing or interesting enough. But you know what? The most popular secular prose work of the time was probably The Voyage and Travels of Sir John Mandeville. It was all made up, but people couldn't resist the allure and occasionally fancy writing style of this Sir John Mandeville guy and his supposed adventures in Asia. English readers were hooked on that story for centuries. I mean, just look at a few of the excerpts here. They are hilarious. In this country, there is a peculiar kind of serpent, so huge that it can swallow a camel whole. If you don't have a camel on hand, it will settle for a smaller snack like a sheep or a large pumpkin pie. In the land of Prester John, there are trees that bear not fruit but pies. Imagine strolling through an orchard, plucking apple pies and cherry pies instead of regular old fruits. It's a dessert lover's paradise. I encountered a group of people in Ethiopia who had their heads at the back of their necks, just like a rooster. They claimed it made it easier to keep an eye on everything, but I couldn't help wondering how they managed to wear hats. Beware of the griffins in the deserts of Egypt. These mighty creatures have the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. If you come across one, make sure to carry a bag of roasted marshmallows as a peace offering. It seems they have a weakness for sweet treats. Someone's imagination took a wild detour into a world of pure silliness. I mean, seriously, who comes up with trees that magically grow pies and people with rooster heads? It's like they mixed up their dreams with reality and ended up with a delightful mess of utter nonsense. I have to give them credit though for creating a realm where camels are devoured by giant serpents and griffins have a weakness for marshmallows. It's an absurd journey that leaves us laughing and wondering what in the world they were thinking. Let's hope they had a good sense of humor and didn't take themselves too seriously while dreaming up these wacky tales. Now, let's see what the other major works and major writers have in store for us, shall we? The Ancren Riwle, Guide for Anchoresses. Ancren Riwle or Ancren Wis or Rule for Anchoresses is a pretty important Middle English text, folks. It was written way back around 1200 and was like a guidebook for a group of religious ladies called anchoresses. These gals lived all secluded, like in a church or next to a monastery, and spent their days praying, meditating, and getting all spiritual. Now, we don't know who exactly wrote this gem because the author didn't bother mentioning their name. But those smarty pants scholars think it was probably some knowledgeable cleric who knew what anchoresses needed. It's likely they wrote it in the West Midlands of England, you know, around Somersetshire, but there's also some influence from the neighboring East Midlands. Fancy, right? The language in Ancren Riwle or Ancren Rule is the early Middle English stuff, the bridge between Old English and Middle English. It's got a mix of the West Midlands dialect and some quirks from the East Midlands. Basically, it shows how English was evolving at the time. Pretty cool, huh? When it comes to style, this book keeps things simple and straight to the point. It's like a manual for the anchoresses, giving them practical advice on how to live their religious lives. It covers all sorts of stuff like praying, being devoted, having self discipline, and behaving like proper anchoresses. Oh, and it even talks about the challenges they might face while being all alone and tempted. This Ancren Riwle thingamajig is not only important for its religious and historical aspects, but also for how it gives us a peek into the language, culture, and religious practices of the time. It's like a window into the past and how English was changing from that Old English era. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome, folks. The second major work of Middle English prose is The Ayenbite of Inwyt, a southern dialect gem. The Ayenbite of Inwyt, literally meaning again biting of inner wit, or the remorse of conscience, or the prick of conscience, as I like to call it, is a total gem from back in the day. It's written in the southern dialect of Middle English. Those cool folks from the south knew how to spin their words. The Ayenbite of Inwyt was written by this dude named Dan Michel of Northgate around 1340. It's not really a big deal in terms of literary value because it's just a translation of a French work. But for language geeks, it's pretty useful to see how people were speaking in the southern dialect back then. Now imagine this. A clever author from Kent whips up this masterpiece in the 14th century. They really capture the unique way those southern folks talked back then. The vocabulary, the grammar, the pronunciation, everything screams southern charm. It's like a language party, y'all. Here's the fun part. The title itself, Ayenbite of Inwyt, sounds like something straight out of a medieval rap battle. It's all about biting your inner wit over and over again, feeling all guilty and stuff. The text dives into moral and ethical themes, shaking up your conscience like a snow globe. It's like a self-help book for medieval peeps, showing them the path to a virtuous life. It's old school motivation, my friends. But what really makes it interesting is how the author blends the southern dialect with the fancy writing styles of the time. They juggle the dialectical quirks and fancy techniques like a pro, creating a one-of-a-kind reading experience. They were like the Shakespeare of the southern dialect, just with a bit less drama and more down-to-earth charm. Sure, the Ayenbite of Inwyt might not be as famous as some other Middle English texts, but it's a hidden gem waiting to be discovered. If you're a language and literature nerd, you will definitely love diving into the linguistic diversity and traditions of the time. It's like finding a secret passage to the rich and complex world of Middle English. It's like unearthing buried treasure, matey. So grab your dictionaries and get ready for an adventure through time and language. William Caxton and the introduction of printing to London. In the ancient times, if you desired a book, you couldn't just hit up Amazon Prime for a quick delivery. No, some dedicated soul had to sit there rare down and painstakingly write every word by hand. Parchment was all the rage back then, but as the late 14th century rolled around, imported paper from exotic lands like Genoa, France, and the Rhine region started making waves. But hold on tight, because here comes the game changer. Enter Johannes Gutenberg, the genius hailing from Germany. Around 1450, this visionary dude revolutionized the game with his mind-boggling invention, the printing press. Suddenly, books were no longer confined to the realm of scribes. By the end of the 15th century, the enchanting world of printed books had made its way to the lively streets of London. Now, let's talk about the star of the show, William Caxton. Born around 1422 in Kent, this guy embarked on an adventurous journey. At a mere 16 years old, he strutted his way to London, aiming to become an apprentice to a mercer. But fate had grander plans for him. Off he went to Bruges, where the wool trade was buzzing, and he scored himself a fancy gig as a diplomat for the king. But wait, it gets even more exciting. The Duchess of Burgundy herself called upon Caxton's skills, requesting a translation of the Riwle of the Histories of Troy. And you know what? He nailed it. In the 1470s, our hero journeyed to Cologne, where he delved into the mystical art of printing. When he returned to Bruges, he didn't waste a second. He set up his own printing press and unleashed the Riwle into the world, making it the first ever printed book in English. Talk about making history. By 1476, Caxton had shifted his printing business to the vibrant streets of England. He chose a prime spot near Westminster Abbey at St. Albans, and guess what? He even rented a shop along a path frequented by the distinguished members of Parliament. This man had style. The following year, he made his mark once again by publishing Dictes or Sayings of the Philosophers, the first English book printed in England. But here's the juicy part. Caxton was not just about his own books. No, sir. He became the ultimate book mogul, importing a plethora of captivating reads from the continent and selling them to the eager merchants of London City. Throughout his life, Caxton produced approximately 100 books. He skillfully translated works from French, Latin, and Dutch into the vibrant language of English. His crowning glory? None other than the legendary Canterbury Tales by the beloved Chaucer. Caxton's books were meticulously crafted, the result of his unwavering dedication to editing and refining. One of his early successes was the game and play of chess, captivating the minds of middle-class readers. Instead of fancy classical texts from the continent, he catered to the tastes of the masses, regaling them with popular translations and enthralling stories. When he bid this world adieu around 1491, his trusty assistant Jan de Winken, better known as Winken de Worde, stepped up to the plate. De Worde ensured the flame of printing continued to burn brightly. A hub of printing emerged, nestled amidst the magnificence of Westminster. This enchanting world of printing endured, leaving its mark until the glorious days of the late 20th century. Now that's what I call a captivating legacy, my friends.